getting quite a bit hotter in this area. Um, I'm just making some, I'm doing a little walk. I'm making some chicken and I'm making some rice. We're doing some clean eating today. Clean eating. So yesterday and then the night before, so for about 24 hours, not 24 hours, I was like clean through the day, and then in the evening I was eating more lower quality sugar foods. I made these bars, these cereal bars. Still got a good amount of that left over. And the Jet Puff marshmallows. I was making these cereal bars, and they really added to my calorie intake. Just became like this anabolic thing, you know. That's way too high. We're gonna keep it like just humming around 1 or 2. So the thing about putting on muscle mass is, from an outside perspective, you just wanna, you think that, oh, I could just put on muscle mass, like I can just get bigger. And for some people, that actually works, where you're able to put on a massive amount of muscle mass, but with that muscle mass, your waist is going to get wider. You're going to need to take in more calories. Your body's not used to storing all that glycogen and shuttling that glycogen into skeletal muscle, right? So at first you get this distended, huge pancreas and liver, right? And you've got all this waste in your system. Your body's trying to process it. And just getting used to the fact that if you want to have the appearance, the hypertrophic appearance of bigger muscles, when I say that, I'm not saying that that doesn't equate directly to strength. Strength is heavily involved in this, right? To the point where you can really change in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks just with your training style. You know, you can go from heavier lifts to more high volume, hypertrophic, or you can add an exercise in, right? You can add an exercise in or two. It's really based on like a base exercise protocol. That is a lot like the heavy duty, high intensity Mike Mentzer style training, you know, and I think everyone can relate with this, male and female these days, because there is this need to better ourselves, and there's a lot of science and data backing up specific exercise modality done over specific periods of time, and so much information based around 8 to 10 week data sets that are provable. And this is really what the YMCA, Durnan and Wormsley, you know, the Mayo Clinic, this is what they base most of their research on, right? They want to see proven results in a double-blind, infrared or inter-rater reliable study. And then there's a networking system, especially these days, just in the advent of ARPANET, which became our WWW, World Wide Web. And now this information and these data sets are passed around the world, and we're talking about like collegiate information. So now AI is able to amalgamate. There's a sense, in a sense, there's a chimera, right? This amalgamation of information has snowballed into complete data sets of information that are available, and then there are certain pieces of information where the information is blocked off to the general public, right? So some of the supplements that actually work, that don't get dissed and don't get poorly talked about or poor reception, are creatine and trimethylglycine, or, you know, collagen, right? Not that there's a direct link, but then you have glycine, right? Or glycine proline with collagen, and then you have trimethylglycine, right? Where you have these trifold envelopes. So glycine is the simplest amino acid. It's heavily correlated and related to serine, blood serine levels, right? And this has been linked with depression and so forth. So glycine tastes sweet, and it's like the sugar in amino acids. Like it can actually be used as a sweetener. So we're cooking up some sweating, disgusting. Look at that. Isn't that gross? Can't stand the way that looks. That is. That is gross. And the Walmart beef, the really cheap beef, does that. So we're gonna let it sweat out the other side too. And we're making some rice. So this is like primarily what goes into natural bodybuilding. It's like, that's almost there. That should click off pretty soon. So what I'm trying to do is I'm getting in about a 2-hour walk. Yep, just clicked. We're going to be using a little bit of Bragg's amino acids behind there. I've been rotating eating potatoes or rice or even lower quality carbs and cycling in oats. And sometimes I'll do the oats with sugar, and other times I'll do the oats without. And today, later on in the day, after I eat these 3 smaller chicken breasts, typically I eat more chicken breasts than that in the day, I'll go toward egg whites, and then we've got some backup. Got tuna here. Yeah, you can see I'm doing it on a shoestring. Those are like all Walmart brand quality. I haven't noticed a huge difference. I do notice a difference with like their really refined flours, pastries and things like that, where I think there's just a way different, when we're talking about the glycemic index and the reaction, the pancreatic reaction. So this is what, my son is on a GLP-1. I didn't decide for him to ever go on a med. The mother did that. And right now, he's unfortunately in her care, and he's close to 30 now, diagnosed schizophrenic. Every time I've had him on any sort of bodybuilding, he just doesn't adhere to anything. But every time I've had him on any sort of natural bodybuilding supplements and working out, he starts to show signs of just being a sort of normal kid, that really enjoys working out. But his mother has never done a push-up in her life. And his brother, who's like kind of a male son husband, right? That's what these borderlines do, is they turn their boys into their husbands, right? And then try to brainwash them into certain behaviors where they are the queen. They're like at the center, at the nucleus of it's very deep, because it's tied into what's considered egalitarian democratic society, and for people who don't really look into this and study like what women's liberation really was, it ties directly into the CIA, Operation Gladio. I mean, there are documented papers that are based around this. And what they're psychological, neuro-linguistic operations of totalitarian control, where they can control the masses by reducing the male component, right? So for years they were doing things like saltpetering food. Now they outright poison us with plastics. People are dying. I mean, a lot of good females are passing away from different types of cancers as well as men. If you want to look at this and the upsurgence of this, I highly recommend looking at Dr. John Campbell's research. But if it looks like I'm going through this sort of unipolar position, it's very complex, and I understand that. I'm not bashing males or females, or nor supplicating and getting on the train where I'm merely taking on such a simple state of mind. But I'm going, no. If you base yourself on the operations of the pervading outlook, right? In other words, if you allow yourself to become a simple thinker, a reactive thinker, right, you are going to become a product. And that's exactly what. So you can't look into this unless you start to look at all the religions and the indoctrination that is done by way of fundamentalist Christianity, which is heavily linked with occult practices, Thelema, Dionysian focus on. So everything, all roads lead back to Vatican, and the Vatican, the Holy Mother is Hathor, and Hathor is in fact Mother Circe, and Mother Circe means church and is the root of the meaning of church. And if you're not able to think in a doxastic, multifarious way, you're not going to see what's really going on here with the witchcraft. In fact, you'll go, oh, all women are evil. And it's like, no. When people follow the planned indoctrination and they become the protocol, right? And this is what appeases other people. This is where you're given, they'll break off a little piece for you if you're a good Manchurian candidate, right? Or a sleeper cell, right? So when you get into the Chinese and the way that they do things, and the heavy propensity toward the Masonic order, and how the Masonic order goes into these other higher tiers in the Asian networking system, and how this ties into every single cabal, mafia agency. It is, I hear a lot of gang members and have for years, and people who were raised around gangs, they're going, holy shit, like all the symbols and the signs, they're taught this shit from an early age, where it becomes undeniable that Santeria and straight up to the Temple of Set and Satanism is being taught. But what happens? They're all talking about Jesus. They're all talking about the Bible. They're all memorizing Bible verses because the Bible contradicts itself, and it's meant to contradict itself because you have the right and the left paradigm going on there. In that book, you have agitation. In that book, you have entropy. In that book, even the meaning of holiness is spelled with an H, right? So it's based on who you are and what you bring to the table. In other words, if you are greater and your intellect is greater, then you're going to see things in a specific way. And even more so, if that's going to be a much lesser percent of the greater whole of society that is going to see things in the way that you do. So if you make it through without going completely nuts or without being put on meds, right? Because what do you do with it? Once you come into the truth, what do you do with it? So that's why your fitness is extremely important. But when I show the compromise of just eating something like this, right? Where this is only $2.50 to get your beef liver in. $2.50 to change your health, right? And to cook that every week. Do you know how bloody that is? Have you ever actually cooked fresh beef liver and seen what a fucking bloody mess it is? I mean, if you care about animals, if you can change the way you think on a dime, there's something very scary about that, to where, I love animals and I love to pet them, but I'm going to eat this animal. It shouldn't be that easy for you. So every time I do eat beef liver, I give reverence. And it sounds tacky, but I give reverence to the cow that had to give up their life. They didn't want to die, right? I know that the vocabulary of animals is massive. I know that they dream. So where are you going to say? I mean, this is the argument that the abortion clinics have, right? Is if you can argue about any life, human life, then you can most assuredly place a value on life and say this has value, this does not have value, right? So I'm poor, and you could say I'm poor out of choice, but I'm poor because I stood up against the machine and I was offered everything or nothing, which is uncertainty. Like when you're not certain about where you are in life or where you're going, you're choosing nothing, right? And even more so, when you practice these principles, like I would always carry my bands and my TRX in my backpack, and I'd go walking for 20, 25 miles. And I was really set in the ways of I'm practicing this kata, I'm practicing these principles, right? And when you get into this, you are meeting, I've shared so many stories where I would be in a situation where there I am walking in Pasadena down these streets where Jack Parsons owned his house, right? And then the next thing you know, if you wanted to go, oh, that's why would that be strange? Next thing you know, I'm driving up into these hills with my uncle who just passed away, who I got this TRX from, and the only reason he even bought the thing. And if I would have been talking to him, maybe he'd still be alive. I don't know, right? But no one listens. Like my son has never listened to me about Wegovy or Ozempic, telling him that's not the way to go. You need to exercise your free will, man. You know, you need to just work out. You need to get your carbohydrates right, you know? And so don't be afraid of carbohydrates, but make sure you get all the nutrients in that you require. But this has been a big mind trip to weaken us to the point where, like, do you think that there even would have been a Conan Barbarian movie made if Arnold Schwarzenegger stayed carnivore? I'm telling you that you can't do it. I'm saying that the muscles are filled up with glycogen and that the glycogen could be asserted to, like, if you want to minimize that, the size of an animal, like a bull walrus, right? Or a sea lion, right? A bull sea lion. When you just look at the size, or a double muscled bovine, right? If you look at the sheer size and the mass, that right there is undeniably a male component, whether female or male, right? Whether female or male, that's a male expression. It's a male expression of power, and it's the power to overcome what? Gravity and a gravity well, right? To not get sucked into the abyss that is inevitable for all of us, but the spirit must champion and go on. So we get into the kata. You get into this Spartan way of thinking, right? And then you realize this isn't an existential thing. This comes down to a kata of what I do in self-reflection in and of and to myself. And the most bizarre avenues, through ways will be presented to you to where you're going to be exhausted. You're not going to be able to carry on or champion this, this stigma, right? The stigma, this dogma that you're a male, so you can't act this way. You're a female, so you can't act this way. You have to act a certain way. I like to cook for a living, you know what? Running out of scissors. Yeah, so did you know that Johnny Depp did ecstasy when he came up with Edward Scissorhands? I mean, did you know that Stephen King coked out, bled over his nose, just bled profusely over his typewriter? Right? When you look at modern culture and you look, so are you just to turn toward DMT trips and say this is our God? Right? Which is from many perspectives, if you look at like um, this the sacred mushroom, Allegra, right? When you look at Joe Rogan's adherence, it didn't fare very well, did it? He was kind of thinking that he could come down to this formulation where he's cracked the mind, he's cracked the body, he's cracked, it's like Jesse Ventura, Jesse the Body Ventura. I don't know how old you are if you remember that. But even the Vince McMahon started to understand and get into with WWE, where it was like the world order, right? In the late 90s, like they were literally playing this out, and you could even see even Hulk Hogan and Andre Giant as two towers, right? I mean, it's a very, or the yellow as an expression of the ego. Like what I'm saying is there's a telegraphing of on every level, even the simplest, most profane aspects of human culture, and that it leads into things where we always go back to Cliff High, even though we know he's Uncle Cliffy's full of shit. He's Uncle Bullshito. That's what I wrote down, because you listen to a lot of his stuff, but he's really picking up on some serious information at the same time. Like it's undeniable, even if he made it all up and he doesn't even have this algorithm or this data set of open source information. Even if he was just doing this on a part-time scale, he's opening himself up to what he likes to use the term prescient, right? Or ontological also, but ontology being that reflection of nature when you get into phenomenon and noumenon, right? And this interaction, but prescient meaning that you could foretell or foresee things, events to come, right? And so you get into this clairvoyant or this cleric type aspect, and you start to see the Indian culture and the Indian ways and this culmination, this energy, right, that you can see through Hinduism and even into Jainism, and how Islamic traditions got directly in the way of that and meant to do that, right? And there's all these derivations and derivatives like Sikhism and so forth, to where they would take the principles that were naturally culminating in these people throughout generations, that they were coming into themselves almost in this profound way where they're becoming, and I don't think it's over for the Indian culture at all. In fact, I think that this is the big challenge, is to realize that these so-called Khazarians and Pharisee, it's mafia. It's mafia. It's the same mob that was involved in World War II, right? When the CIA, or what was the CIA at that time, these were just different operations that were hooked up through a networking system and used. So JJ Vance gets into this a lot on Operation GCD, where he's talking about these programmed killers, but this direct connection with this homicidal, psychopathic energy networking that could be seen as the directing of behaviors within a mafia organization. So my ex-wife is related to Giuliano Pesciota, who he was the Sicilian by Mario Puzo. And her dad was absolutely this skinny, psychotic cokehead. Like that came from his own mouth. He was talking about banging different women. I mean, this guy's like in his 70s at the time. He'd be pushing, I think he would be 99 now. He ended up dying of mesothelioma exposure, because for a while, in a greedy way, he was not taking seriously the asbestos rules, right? He was going, oh, that's bullshit. So they would put on all their suits and all this shit to do excavations and removal and get paid 3-4 times as much. And then at the same time, they would still be installing asbestos. So he was one of those people who didn't give a flying fuck about anybody. And he even said, God, money is his God, right? So you see how my whole point is that this ties into the Sicilians, but it also ties into the Azores and God, why am I not remembering? Portuguese. Yeah, there's a heavy correlation there with these fishing villages, and you got to think about all the things that were done throughout the Africas through the slave trade, where many of these people from every tradition sold their own people out because that's how they ate. This is still happening in the Philippines to this day, where these pedophiles and these terrible people will come in and they have no money. These families have no money, and it's like, yeah, you could take my kid. It's just another mouth to feed, and they don't really serve a purpose. But they're not really given an opportunity to serve a purpose, right? There's no instruction. Like when we bitch in the U.S. about not having enough opportunity, not having enough instruction, and we're producing these incels, right? This really is an incel production factory. That's what's happening in the U.S. Like the entire agenda, the great work, the Golden Dawn, would you ever have believed that all the efforts that were put into, that you put in every single day, why you're broke, while the World Economic Forum basically just treats us like puppets, but it's also just an arm. And that's what Julian Assange was coming out with. I remember discovering the 1001 Club at that time that completely disappeared. It showed the octopus or the multi-layered Hydra head to the organization that now most of the people, and I gotta say, I gotta give a shout out to not only Operation GCD, but this is lemon Crystal Light, really lightly flavored, a little bit of caffeine in it. The Underclass podcast, Headless Giant, Heidi Love. Of course, I mentioned JJ Vance. I'm not affiliated with any of these people, but if I had studied to the depth that they did, I would be going on these programs. If I don't have anything to offer, as far as the networking goes, and the books, I mean, I don't want to get into even listening to hours long lectures or books at this point. I've done that. The information wasn't really available, but I was able 15 years ago to read informations that aren't available today. Now, whether or not that information could be vetted out, there is a heavy propensity toward what's happening now, which is this heavy occupation toward Nazism. And if you're going to look at Ingersoll Lockwood and the might seem like it's going off on a trail here, starting to get a little sweat on. That's good. Getting a little walk going, trying to prep up for my workout here and see if I got the energy to hit it with a lot of intensity. I'm backing off entirely if I can't just go in and hit it with maximal intensity as far as my resistance training goes, because I'm using like a close to a 30-pound backpack right now, doing all my exercises along with my resistance bands, and it's been really working well. But to go into this networking system and to really take a look at it, we see undeniably and have for many years that the Nazi occupation is at the root of all this, right? And so when you start to look at Jason Rizzo-Giorgiani's research on Anna Luna, it's fucking insane. She's directly hooked up with her grandfather. She even changed her name to Luna because, like, he wrote a whole expose on this on Substack if you want to check it out. It's going back about 2 months. He started to charge for all of his very perspicacious writing abilities and ability to research. And I mean, the guy taught on a collegiate scale, so it's no wonder. You don't have to agree with everything about him, particularly his views on Amon Hillman and his relationship there. But that's almost like saying Gnostic informant, Neil on Gnostic informant should just be throw the baby out with the bathwater sort of thing, right? But the crazy thing is that all of this leads back to, like, the roads that lead back to Babylon first now lead back historically to World War II and the Nazi occupation, right? And we have to get away from seeing things as negative or positive. We have to start looking further at the Die Glocke, the Nazi bell, and to whether or not that was a successful occupation in human discovery, consciousness, and a sort of hacking into the fibers. I'm gonna say it outright, like the telomeres of, because our telomeres. So there was this huge study, and this leads into a lot of Dr. Michael Levin's work, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to do with this. There was this huge groundbreaking study, and I don't know his affiliation with it. We better turn that off because that's burning. With telomere length, right? So there was this huge study done just recently. It was published that undeniably stated that if you were to take in a certain amount of vitamin D over a 3-year period, you could significantly elongate your telomere length. So why this is important is because this obviously implies a healthy genetic profile. You know, your adenine, cytosine, guanine, thymine, right? And uracil for DNA, RNA. Let's say resynthesis, right? Scrambling. So everything has to be there. All these micronutrients have to be there. When we say micronutrients, the reason that I use that term is because I'm hailing back to Orthomolecular Science and Nutrition by Linus Pauling, right? Who coined the term because he saw the direct correlation to amino acids, and he understood that these nutrients, when we're talking about vitamin D, we have to include K2, obviously, vitamin E, and I don't want to go on an extensive list, but to say that all of these fat soluble vitamins have to be there, right? As nutritional components, and definitely have to get into CLA and omega-3 and the permeability of your cells and the cell inception and the mitochondrial health. And then you sort of get into, I'm not going to say that this is direct, but it's like kind of like this greens-based chlorophyll, copper, selenium, zinc mechanism that is found in a lot of dark leafy green plants, as well as what I'm eating over here is like beef liver, right? Because there's such a high concentration of it. And if you're taking in my recommended beef liver, sardines, not necessarily together because that's kind of gross, but I've done it and it doesn't taste that great. And eggs, I've done that in a scramble, but you're essentially getting in all your choline. I will. The only thing that I noticed that you have to supplement with. So this leads back to Dr. Thomas Levy, right? He's one of the main proponents and researchers of how the passing of the gauntlet of the orthomolecular science and nutrition field. So the person that I always recommend, which is Billie J. Saley, Heal with Amino Acids and Nutrients. She's not even on the orthomolecular.org archives, right? I'm not sure if she just pissed people off, if it was because of her lesbianism, or she just got too damn close, which is what I think it was. And I think a lot of people are being turned homosexual as a planned aspect to the operation where they can be controlled, right? So instantly you have somebody who can be exploited. So sure, people like Alan Turing, Gary Nolan are going to be handed these higher intelligence quotients to where they have access to all this, but then they're so easily manipulated, not only just with dark secrets and so forth, but from the inside out, you know. And the same thing holds true with all these secrets with females, that many of these very renowned genius female scientists who are really living on the scale, on the edge. So this kind of gets into Jake Barber a little bit and his illusions and stuff that leads into Chris Bledsoe, his illusions with bisexuality that leads directly into Rosicrucianism And then once you go into the Rosicrucianism, you have the floodgates are open to go into the Process Church, Mormonism, Operation Gladio, and obviously the Masonic Order, which goes by many, many different names, you know. And just to keep up with all this shit, like for me, I thought I was maxed out 10 years ago, where I'm looking at all this information, go, how in the fuck do people even, you know, it's John Todd shit, and then it's going off into this other, all these other venues, all these other areas. And what I always like to tell people is look at your own family history, and you'll realize what your campaign is, where you're at, and where they threw you off. And a lot of times you have to do major deep diving. But if you think you're not related to anyone, that's what they want you to think. You don't have any members of your family lineage or even affiliated with the Society of the Cincinnati, which by all efforts and all means is where the Knights Templar led to, right? So when it seems like I'm going off on this trail, I'm loosely trying to show you the divisive actions of how and the mechanisms of control, and how we have to go back to the O fights, and we have to look at Cain and Abel, or at least the story, and really take seriously that, you know, Cain offered slaughtered animals, which is what we're eating predominantly today. What's available is I can spend $2.50 and get all the nutrients that are missing from my diet by eating this for a whole week. That's an entire week's worth, okay? You get into Cain and Abel, and then when we're talking about Abel, who was offering the bounty of grains, right? Grains, taking that in, and how all these grains have to be fortified because they're stripped of nutrients. They're stripped of having any true nutrients, and yet the wheat, I mean, if you just left the fucking wheat the way it was, right? So why isn't it left that way? Well, it's the same reason for the rice here, right? Enriched, bleached, enriched rice is that it had to be shelf stable. So you start to look at these campaigns like beriberi, pellagra, right? You start to look at all these diseases, the Black Plague, right? You start to look at how, or COVID, you start to look at how an immune system could be weakened by way of doing the opposite of orthomolecular nutrition to make right your nutrition, right? To make right what's available in your body, to make right your balance. And then to say, in order for you to get this and do this, you're going to have to buy the beef liver. You're going to have to sacrifice an animal. In fact, you're going to have to for you to eat that. It's not one animal you're sacrificing. That's probably not even sliced from one animal. They throw it in this big vat and it squirms around in there. Can you imagine how bloody and disgusting the beef liver? I mean, God, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't work with all that, those slaughtered animals and all that blood. And some people do, you know? So at this point, I'm going to walk another hour or so before I even eat, knowing that I've got the rice, knowing that I've got the chicken available to me is huge. And I'm going to add in, I don't want that to get overcooked. Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. That rice is perfect. Chicken's perfect. All right. Let's take a look. I might even cook that chicken a little bit more because I'm like heavily paranoid about chicken. Yeah, let's cook it even a little more since I got the time to do that, right? We'll just cook it on really low. Cook it on super low. So I'm trying to get my blood flow going, get my sweat on, kick my metabolism up. I took 1 scoop of whey protein. I still have some, which is amazing because it was like 3 months ago that I bought that. And because I've been buying so many different ketogenic meat-based products, like the huge amounts of burgers that I have left in here, and the chicken and the bacon and the fattier. I even got like another one back there, the fattier chicken, the beef liver, and the lean chicken. I mean, I've got so much food available that's making it possible for me to do this. So all these subjects are extremely important. And what they get in the way of is your own personal development, because the trickle down, so the supply chain affects you, your life, straight to your door. It gives most people a headache. Nobody's talking about what I'm talking about, where they're actually linking this all together and going, do you see the coherence? Are you going to acknowledge the coherence, right? Are you going to acknowledge that you are forced into becoming part of the process of operational awareness, that you are nothing but an aspect of the systemized program? But when you begin to wake up, it is immediately aware of you, and it will call you out. It will call you out. It will penetrate into your mind. And there's no way that a group of demon entities would just be hanging out, waiting to fuck with you. And so what am I implying? I'm implying that Cliff High's father, and even Cliff High, to a great extent, sold themselves out through their lineage going way back, took an oath, changed the genetic directive, and have been working as planned operatives from the very beginning. And I think he knows it. I think that he's as much of a sellout as his father and his father before him. Yeah, I really believe that. I think actually Cliff High is actually an evil person. And he had even admitted it a few days ago. And what I'm finding, it's very interesting, is that I'm finding many people, it's refreshing. It's refreshing for me to see that Kevin on Eek Acres, though he's getting all these people that are signing up with him from this fundamentalist perspective, and he's just brandishing around as if he's a Christian, barely even mentioned it prior to, but once the money starts rolling in, ooh, he's a high roller, right? And then the other day, Cliff High. So it's refreshing to see negative comments where people are of a higher intellectual, perspicacious thought process, where they're taking these people apart and seeing it for what it is, right? That is an implication that there's life on Earth, that there's actual thinkers, right? That is refreshing. And the same thing's happening with Cliff High. Well, you'll see and I believe that actually his unofficial YouTube channel is just Cliff High's idea that he's somehow superior to other people, and that he has Heidi or someone else actually running his channel, because he thinks he's so unique that he actually does have stalkers, that somebody would actually stalk him. So, and then he's got a whole group of people who think that this Heidi character, who's like a 30-something-year-old girl, and Cliff, like, he looks terrible. Like, he's looked like he's about 85 years old for the last 20 years. Like, if you go back and look at his interviews. So now, with all of his temerity and hubris and his, he's an intellectual, maybe even like, he may even have like borderline type traits or histrionic type traits, right? Because what 70-year-old would be scouting for PUSSY, 30-year-old, he like, in this one interview, he's a complete and total pervo. One of his first interviews with this person, and then she's thinking she's doing all this divining and tarot card shit. It's like, dude, do you realize? And so the other day in one of his it wasn't a live stream, but like, and that's another thing that puts this YouTube channel under great suspicion, is how they expedite. Like, literally, there is not an hour that goes by, right? And it takes time to upload it. So I was like looking at it going, holy shit, they started fucking up. Like, in other words, this little thing that they got going where they're acting like somebody has pirated a YouTube channel, right? And that someone has gone off and started a YouTube channel and then they show this Asian woman. That's the type of weird sense of humor that Cliff High has. That's how much intellectual temerity and hubris that motherfucker has. Actually, after watching him over the last year and a half, I not only think of him in a way, regard him as a complete and total bullshitter and con artist, but I also regard him as someone who's actually dangerous to other people. And I think that he's even an abusive person. And I think he was probably abusive to his wife and that he did cheat on her. In fact, he knew this girl Heidi while his wife was still alive. Like, he doesn't seem like a widower that's sad. And I've never even heard him mention his wife. It's bizarre. And when you get into this, you got to understand that these stories that are going around about Garth Brooks, like, people are taking this shit seriously. I just posted something up last night on this channel under community posts about this Danny Jones actually interviewing somebody 3-4 days ago and him going, and this guy straight up going, look, there's like 2,000 people that are unaccounted for when Garth Brooks has gone on tour over the last 30 fucking years of his career, to the point where there's a really, like, we're talking within 1 to 2 miles and at least 5 miles where people would just disappear and he was in town. Right? He was in town and 3 or 4 people would just disappear. So I'm kind of getting into, I don't remember and you could look this up easily, but I'm walking right now and I'm obviously in a live stream, but you could easily look this up because this shows the same bizarre trend, very similar to Jeff Buckley and that chick that he was hanging out with who's still alive and writes her songs in the weirdest ass way. And she basically is like this siren, or I don't remember what the terminology was, but she's like this clairvoyant Morai witch type person who had a relationship with Jeff Buckley. Is it Jeff or can't remember the father and who the son is, but that's the whole point that they try to do. They try to obscure these people, right? But look it up. I gave you a name for a reference, and she's been around for like 30 years, and she's got these really strange lyrics, and people are still like following her, right? But you get this prescient, strange feeling, and this is the same thing that Cliff High is actually resigning himself to and wants to be. Okay, so the other day during one of his Substack, we're talking just like 3 days ago, he fully admitted to manipulating, using this, what he understands, and his deployment of this sort of technology is using this together for his own advantage, so that he could have security. He fully admitted it, and it's like, okay, how can you then cast stones at any Khazarians or any Pharisees when you just admitted that you're exactly like them? I knew this before. So I posted something else up where Michael Tsarian goes in and he's actually looking at the center to these warlocks and what warlocks are. So you may enjoy looking that up, but I did a fairly deep dive into the term warlock and what warlocks really are, what they're regarded as, right? But you do get into this witchcraft and witch lore literature. And to me, they're just drones for witches, because you do have this male witch process that occurs where, of course, like, people think, oh, this is ridiculous that you think that Garth Brooks would be a serial killer. And it's like, you could think the same thing about Tom Cruise, right? Like, what better cover up? Look at their ideology. Look what they believe in. Even Christianity is fucking insane. Like without Christianity, there wouldn't be Satanism. These are two halves of a coin. And of course, people are going to revert toward what makes them think that they are better or more superior, but it actually acknowledges a lower intelligence quotient. Like they've even looked at the fact that at a time, 25% of scientists identified themselves as Christians, right? Well, I guarantee that if you were to take their intelligence quotient, those are the 25 scientists who score the least on the intelligence quotient. And even more so, Plutchik's wheel. I guarantee that if you looked at it from a Daniel Goldman perspective of social intelligence, emotional intelligence, you're going to find an even lower score with those people who want to use everything that's available as a resource in society in their favor to be able to feel like they're superior, right? This idea of superiority. And I'm not saying Cliff High's not intelligent. In fact, I think he's smart enough to really fuck himself over. I would venture to say that from my experience, I think Cliff High has an IQ, and this sounds like a weird number, but I've known other people that scored at this number. And I'm not going to say any more about this, but I think he's at an IQ of 147. I think he's smart enough to get himself into shit. He's smart enough to kick the dust up and create a lot of a shitstorm for other people, but he's not smart enough, nor does he have the inclination to get people out of it, nor himself. You know, so as people are becoming more transparent and more honest and putting information out there, and oftentimes it's just, like I say, under the guise of their own hubris, that they have to run their mouth. And like Cliff High, it used to be, you know, Uncle Cliffy had the dogs in the background. He was baking bread. He was doing something. He was talking about things on a level where he really supposedly wanted to connect with other people. Now he's full on admitting that he's manipulating the field around him for his own benefit. Like he straight up said that 3 days ago. So you could go on the Cliff High channel, and even more so, his ramblings and his focus has completely been thrown off in this sort of ADD cloud, where even though he has the chalkboard behind him, well, I don't think he does. Those are older interviews. But even though he has like a map behind him and he's trying to lay out like he's articulating in detail what his thought process is, when you really follow what he's saying, it's all gibberish. It makes no fucking sense. And I think that he has, you know, art imitates life, life imitates art. When we get into the meaning, the term techne, when you begin to look at the fact that he has become an aspect or a representation of the very algorithm that he's supposedly founded the technology to be able to uncover and decode, that he has slipped into, he's made this Faustian deal, right? Because what did he really want? What did he really want? I've always known that he felt like he got old too fast. He was an army brat. He got everything that he ever wanted, right? And he was able to do whatever he wanted and get away with whatever he wanted and be a little shit, right? And then go into the occupation that he wanted and buy the Bitcoin that he wanted. And everything that he states is, I am a spoiled fucking baby boomer. He is one of the people that everyone should detest, actually. He's implicit in what the baby boomers as a collective have been. And I'm not a baby boomer, I'm an X-gen, okay? Don't ever get it confused, because I have been abused by these fucking people. I was like one of the original emus, man. I had a black room. I didn't know what the fuck was going on, but I could see everything. There's a very evil, suspicious hue over everything in society. And can you imagine understanding this on a fundamental scale, not having any of the answers, and then trying to come up with some answers on my own, only to realize that many of the assertions that I made have actually come into being, right? Could I give an example of this? I think some areas when I was literally just thinking about quantum physics when I didn't understand how the quantum mechanics worked or the quantum physics when I was like 9, 10, 11 years old, right? And I'm wondering, how is it that my thoughts are changing, that I'm being attacked by this sort of entities, that I have nobody to talk to, that in my dreams I'm being chased around my house by witches, that they're coming to my window. There was one night when I was 9 years old where I laid my head didn't even touch the pillow and I was abducted. And there's like 8 to 10 hours of just missing time where I was even told that I wouldn't remember most of this unless certain things happened, right, in society, but that information was going to be shown to me. And I had to even go through this process. The last memory I have, I'm standing looking over this sort of Middle Eastern valley with much clarity. I can still even picture exactly the way it looked to this day. And to my left, there was like this 30 to 50 foot giant that was wearing like these gladiator type Spartan wear, right? And I somehow knew that I was also very large, but this being or this entity like eclipsed me. And I was like, why are you showing me this? Is like this all my fault? But I'm looking at it and it's like there was no destruction, but there was no one around, right? It was a very quiet and solemn place. And I was told that I was going to wake up and that I would only remember this because I remember feeling like, why the fuck did I just go through all this sort of training? Or I can't even remember what it was, right? So there are these impressions of understanding on a fundamental scale what was happening in the tapestry and the meshwork, the matrix, if you will, right? Where things were being manipulated, but it was being done on a multifarious scale where you really have this sort of shift light color coding ambiguity, right? But these cusps or shades in between that we really fashion as reality ourselves, right? Where we think that we're thinking based on these hard-nosed facts of reality, but really where we're living is in these transitions between spherical energies or fields, right? And to be able to like put this together and understand this, like I understood that there was a holographic aspect. We're talking like 9 years old, right? There was a holographic aspect to all this where everything was just replicating from and generating from sort of a Planck wall, a microscalar level on into this larger uniformal aspect of where you would look at the solar system or planetary bodies, but that the same behavior was happening and a manipulation was occurring right here, right now in our current time and our current status, which is always now through the manipulation of gases, metals, and things like this, right? But how do you even articulate something like that when you're that old, you know, and you don't even have the information? The same shit is on the front of these magazines that is now. They were doing the same fucking studies with the Shroud of Turin that 40 years ago that they're doing right now. People were talking about computational systems. I mean, look at Konrad Zuse and Alan Turing, you know? The same fucking shit's being talked about on the pervading scale of the information that we're privy to. We just read other headlines that are slightly more solidified, right? But they were sending out probes into space. The same fucking shit was happening. There's no difference except for our perception of a greater technology, you know? And that's another thing that I really don't like about Cliff High, you know, is where, you know, more recently over the last like 6 months, he was really following the trail on the Voyager information that was sent back and the AI systems that were interpreting information And then he sort of got to this place, this selfish point of view, this place where all of his talks now have slipped away from being one of sort of this universal love and really, for a lack of a better term, Congress, right? To be able to work together in a governance and to be able to figure things out from a more primal state of the human condition, and to be able to create this treatise or this unwritten architecture in a constitution, and to be able to say, no, we're going to follow natural law and natural order. Instead, he brags about all his Bitcoin and his young girlfriend, and how he's stalked, and how he's justified why he's really justifying why he's spending his money. Why he's spending his money on his little castle and his girlfriend. Yeah. And he's also an older man who's sort of like going through this midlife crisis 20 or 30 years late. But maybe that was because his wife was sick, but he never talked about her, never discussed her. And I find that odd and sad. And I find it extremely telling that he would be going out with some 30-year-old chick who's into tarot cards. And his history of what he's worked on, what he's been involved in. You know, it almost reminds me of John McAfee or McAfee, right? However you want to pronounce it, spelling, where he wanted everybody to know that he was a genius, like Elon Musk, like all these fucking nitwits. And then when you get down to it, they have this occulted, it's almost like John Dee with a demon chasing after him. It's like, we know how you came into the information. All these people will tell you that it's, or, you know, Epstein and McAfee and all these fuckers are dead, or they're assumed to be dead, pseudo dead. Who knows? Maybe there is some fucking Shambhala, right? Maybe they are scanning all of us topographically and recording us, and just that's the feeling that I walked away with when I was very young, is that I realized this has all been done before. It's not necessarily a cross correlation directly to Nietzsche's flat time, but there's an effort technologically being made, and I think that Peter Thiel falls directly into this. And if you don't know about Peter Thiel's relationship with, you know, Palantir, if you don't, and PayPal, right, and Elon Musk, but if you don't know about his relationship with the Jesse Michaels, who's a very odd one, right? He's a very odd person. Like, what the fuck, right? He's interviewing, like, the first thing I'm seeing, he's interviewing Diane Pasulka, heavily suspect. Gary Nolan, links to Gary Nolan, all these fucking people. And just really bizarre, the information that he comes out with. And then his connections with Weinstein and all these fuckers who think that they're geniuses. And what I'm getting at is that these people are all brainwashed, and they're all being fed information all the way down to Nikola Tesla. And so you can imagine how long this has been going on, but they are being controlled like fucking radio controlled robots. And we actually have those today, where it's like, in the past, it's like, oh no, you could never do that. That's conceptual. And then you get into it and you're like, not only could you have a radio controlled robot, at this point, you could have a robot in front of you that you couldn't distinguish between something that was fabricated. No clicks, no problems with software or programming. Then might even pass off as human, to the point where they could go through a fucking uh, past a scanner or through, airport security X-ray and not even be detected. And they've been talking about this for years, but they've been able to do this for a long time as well. I knew a guy, an old guy, when I was like 15 years old. I was down south on some trip. Maybe I was a little older than that. And this guy lived, he was this artist, and he lived right next to this college in Southern California. I don't remember if it was Irvine. It was one of those colleges down there. It was a big UC. And he said that he knows people who work in there and regularly like hung out with and had coffee, I think he was saying, with somebody who runs more than one person who runs the science department. And he said, this is 45 years ago. He said, oh, they've been cloning people for quite a while. They've been doing it for a long time. And this has been told to me, and I've even seen shit, is what he said. So you could take that for what. And even the areas like way back then, that's when Joseph Campbell was on the scene. The hero's journey, kind of getting beyond the mysticism and seeing how these stories correlate toward an occulted sort of great work that takes place in each one of us, right? And it's not going to be a pretty process or a pretty picture, that it's going to be a fight to be able to develop yourself, but that the world is kind of like fashioned in a way where it's a forced notion to have to do this, right? And so many people interpret this techne, or this art, science, technology blended with art, as their own expression, right? But it depends on your level of selfishness, or the idea where you can't let go of the self, and the self is the false self. That if you've reached this place where the self is the false self, right? The idea of self is the false self. It's just nuance, right? And this is something Cliff High likes to talk about a lot too. But then you get to this place where you're unwilling to let go of the Christmases and the idea of self, and that you can't live with the fact that, so on a mechanical level, you would say, oh, well, that just means that you really are this sort of drone, and that you're supposed to open yourself up to whatever powers that be that run you. And that if something, a singular entity, is more real than you, then you want to allow that to be your God and to take you over, right? So this is where principles get in the way for them, is the fact that the easiest thing to ask yourself, no matter where you are, and the easiest way to assess whether or not something is benevolent, good, or evil, is to simply look at the fact that, is this a pure intention? Is this a pure being? Is this what stems from a pure source? Or does this have a priority of its own? Does it have an agenda? Does it have a narrative, right? Because if it does, then it's working with things on a carnal, corporeal level, just like you are, right? So it's trying to take on the guise of this supremacy. So this is the scary thing, is that these powers have been around much longer than you and I. In fact, they have engineered us. And so when you get into the fact that it's stated from a theological sense that Satan is the ruler of this world, you get into what Satan really means, and you uncover Satana, Hathor, right? Prometheus, this androgynous, this woman who has male parts or counterparts, Rosicrucianism, right? And you get into Mother Circe and the fact that this being really is a woman and is able to procreate. Then you start to look at some freaky shit like the Statue of Liberty and other implications, that it's like, well, is there any male or female, or is there just something that we would consider a higher state androgynous sort of being? And that's the scary part to this whole thing, right? Is that we come to this physical state, and then you come to this, the mental operation and the connection to a technology That is to say, what does this entity look like from a non-material perspective? Like, sure, like Cliff High likes to talk about this as well with the Materium, right? So, I mean, he caved in. He supplicated, right? He got scared. He'd admit it. He'd push the button and blow everyone up and say, "Oh yeah, I got freaked out. Sorry." He's that type of skittish sort of guy. It's like, then you have to start thinking, was he implicit all along? Because when we're talking about planned operational awareness, you look at somebody who has built into them, the only people with any sort of genius or information are those who can be controlled. So in other words, we're going to put all this genius in you, but then we're going to put a kill switch where at the same time you are this really insecure, or maybe you just have a ravenous sexual appetite, or maybe you just want to be praised so much, or maybe you're just like this schizoid personality where this entity goes, yeah, you'd be perfect for the job. I could put coding in your body and save it. You're never going to try to do anything with it. You're going to misinterpret it. You'll mislead a lot of people along the way. You'll get these cult factions coming together, but I can embed a sort of mimetic code or sequence within you, right? And so you wonder what the fuck's really going on. We don't have enough information, or do we? You know, and then people go, "Oh yeah, praise God." It's like, which God are you talking about? You both believe in different gods. Now let's follow you through the whole day and see what you do all day. Well, I didn't never say I wasn't a sinner. And it's like, fuck you, okay? You're an agenda-based person. And this is what you come down to, is that when you realize that other people are agenda-based, you have to really ask yourself the questions of what does that mean, right? And when you get older and you see what something seems so minor as far as nuances or likes or what someone has a propensity for, right? When you really begin to look at the way that people take themselves seriously, the way that they rail against the machine, put their nose to the grindstone, they're serious about this shit. There isn't a person on the planet, no matter how much of a buffoon you think they are, how lackadaisical you think they are in their efforts, they are fucking serious about whatever they believe in, no matter what the delivery is. And when you look at that again, and I'll end it with this, is that human beings are very scary animals. Like when you take the hair off of a bear, or you take the feathers off of a bird, when you take the skin off a human being, you can really see the way this strange creature, this homunculus type creature, really craves and feels and what activates it to do certain things. And it is self-promoting. It is against anything else that's living. It wants to be worshipped. It uses magic. It speaks spells. And when you look at like some cadaver that's sitting there that has its skin removed, and you see those eyeballs and the musculature, and you think, wow, this is what this thing does at night when it thinks nobody's watching, where it's doing all these this mancy and all this, right? You start to look at the human body a lot differently.